For most of my childhood, people whispered about my mother. It was never loud enough to confront, never clear enough to challenge, but it was always there. The soft murmurs at family gatherings, the concerned looks from neighbors, the sympathetic smiles from my father's colleagues when my mom walked into a room. Everyone had the same quiet opinion. My mother, Claire, was unstable. At least, that's what my father always said. To the outside world, my father was the picture of respectability. He was a successful doctor, admired by patients, and respected in the community. People trusted him instantly. He had a calm voice, a reassuring smile, and the kind of presence that made people believe every word he said. So when he told people that my mother struggled with anxiety and paranoia, they believed him without question. Including me, growing up, my mom always seemed nervous. She worried about things that didn't make sense to me at the time. Sometimes she would sit at the kitchen table late at night with stacks of papers spread out around her, studying them like they held the answer to some impossible puzzle. When I asked what she was doing, she would give me a tired smile, just checking something, she would say softly. But the next morning, my dad would laugh about it. "Your mom stayed up all night again," he would say while pouring his coffee. "She thinks the bank made another mistake." Another mistake, that was what he always called it. Mom insisted that money was disappearing from her accounts. She said that funds she had inherited from her parents were slowly vanishing. She claimed there were transfers she had never approved, withdrawals she didn't recognize, and balances that never matched what she remembered. Dad always had an explanation. "Claire forgets things," he would say gently to relatives. "Her memory isn't what it used to be." And people nodded with understanding. Sometimes my mom tried to defend herself. Her voice would shake as she pointed at papers and numbers. "I know what was there," she would insist. "I wrote everything down." But Dad would sigh like a patient man dealing with something exhausting. "Claire," he would say calmly, "you're confusing yourself again." Eventually, people stopped taking her seriously. Friends visited less often. Conversations around her became careful and short. Even family members avoided arguing with her because they assumed it would only make things worse. The strange thing was, my mom never stopped keeping records. Boxes filled with bank statements appeared in the house. Receipts, printed emails, and handwritten notes stacked up in neat piles. She labeled everything carefully, almost obsessively. Dad mocked it openly. "She's building evidence for a crime that doesn't exist," he joked once at dinner. Everyone laughed except my mother. She just looked down at her plate and quietly said something I didn't understand at the time. "One day," she whispered, "someone will raid it." I didn't realize then how important those words would become. Because 25 years later, after everyone had stopped believing her, I would open a storage unit that proved she had been telling the truth all along. The house felt strangely quiet after my mother's funeral. For years it had been filled with tension arguments behind closed doors. My mother's anxious pacing in the hallway. My father's tired sighs whenever she brought up money again. Now there was only silence, the kind of silence that settles into the walls and makes every room feel unfamiliar. Dad handled everything with the same calm efficiency he always had. Paperwork, phone calls, legal documents. He moved through it all like someone managing a routine problem. I helped where I could, mostly sorting through closets and drawers. My mother had never thrown anything away. Old letters, receipts, notebooks, and folders were tucked into every corner of the house. One afternoon, I opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand. Inside was a small wooden jewelry box I had never seen before. Most of it was empty, except for a single object resting in the center, a small silver key. Attached to it was a faded plastic tag with black numbers printed across it. 314. I turned it over in my hand, confused. It didn't look like a house key or a car key. It was thicker, heavier, like something meant for a locker or a storage unit. I walked into the kitchen where my father sat reviewing documents. "Dad," I said, holding up the key, "do you know what this is for?" He barely glanced at it, no idea. It was in Mom's drawer. He shrugged and returned to his papers. "Probably something she forgot about years ago. Your mother kept all kinds of useless things." Something about his tone made me pause. You don't think it could be important? Dad gave a small laugh. Claire thought everything was important. Remember those boxes of bank statements she used to keep? I nodded. She convinced herself they proved some kind of conspiracy. He continued. Eventually, I stopped trying to argue with her. He waved his hand dismissively. If it's a storage unit or something, it's probably full of old junk. Old junk. That phrase stuck in my mind the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the number online and found a small storage facility about 20 minutes away. It wasn't a large corporate place, just a row of metal units behind a chain-link fence on the edge of town. The office smelled like dust and old paperwork. A middle-aged manager looked up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" I placed the key on the counter. "My mom passed away last week," I explained. "I think she might have rented a unit here." He picked up the key and examined the tag. Then he slowly turned to his computer. After a few seconds he nodded. "Unit 314, he said. "Claire Hale." My chest tightened. She rented it a long time ago. He continued. "How long?" The manager looked back at the screen. 22 years. I blinked in surprise. She never missed a payment either. He slid a clipboard toward me. "You're listed as the emergency contact. If you want to see what's inside, I can take you there." A strange feeling settled in my stomach as I signed the form. For some reason, I suddenly knew one thing for certain. Whatever was inside that unit, my mother had never meant for it to be forgotten. The manager led me through a long row of metal storage units. The air smelled like dust and hot asphalt, and the sound of our footsteps echoed in the narrow corridor between the buildings. We stopped in front of a gray metal door. 314, he slid the key into the lock and twisted it. The metal latch clicked open with a dull sound. "Well," he said, pulling the door halfway up, "here it is." Then he stepped back and left me alone. For a moment I just stood there, staring inside. The unit was packed from floor to ceiling, with plastic storage bins. They were stacked in careful rows, each one labeled with neat handwriting. Everything looked organized, almost like a small archive instead of a place to dump old belongings. I stepped inside slowly. The first bin I pulled down had a label on the front. "Bank Statements 1998, my chest tightened." I opened the lid and found stacks of neatly arranged documents. Every page had been highlighted with yellow marker. Notes were written in the margins in my mother's careful handwriting. One phrase appeared again and again. "Transfer I did not authorize." I frowned and pulled out another folder, more bank statements, more highlighted numbers. More notes. At first I assumed it was the same thing my father had always described. My mother obsessing over imagined problems. But as I kept reading, something started to feel wrong. The numbers were precise. Dates were carefully circled. Transfers were connected by arrows drawn across pages. This wasn't random. This was investigation. I opened another bin. This one was labeled. Account summaries inside were spreadsheets my mother had created. Page after page listed account balances, deposits, withdrawals, and transfers. Every entry was cross-referenced with bank statements. The totals were written at the bottom of each page. I grabbed a calculator from my phone and started adding a few of the highlighted transfers. $10,000. 8,000. 15,000. The numbers kept climbing. My stomach slowly twisted into a knot. I opened another folder and froze. The label read, "Private Investigator Report." Inside were letters and printed emails from someone named Michael Turner, a financial investigator. One sentence on the first page made my heart start pounding. "Our review suggests that Dr. Raymond Hale transferred funds from Claire Hale's personal accounts into investment accounts under his sole control." I read it again, certain I had misunderstood. But the next page made everything worse. It listed every suspicious transfer my mother had tracked. The amounts, the dates, the accounts they had been moved into. At the very bottom of the report, a final number was written in bold type. Total estimated funds transferred, $2, 847 zeros, €0 nearly $3 million. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, staring at the page while my mother's handwriting filled the margins beside it. He will say I'm crazy, but the numbers don't lie. My hands shook as I reached into the final bin sitting in the back corner. Inside was a single sealed envelope. My name was written on the front, Daniel underneath it in smaller letters. My mother had written something else. When you're ready to know the truth. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, soft, careful, and slightly slanted, just like it had always been when she wrote birthday cards or little notes in my lunchbox when I was a kid. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a folded letter and a small flash drive. I opened the letter first. Daniel, if you are reading this, it probably means I'm no longer here to explain everything myself. I'm sorry for that. I always hoped one day you would ask me about the boxes, and I could show you the truth while I was still around. My chest tightened as I kept reading. Your father spent many years convincing people that I was confused or unstable. I know it must have been difficult for you to understand what was happening, and I never blamed you for believing him. The words blurred slightly as my eyes filled with tears. For a long time, I tried to confront him. Every time I brought up the missing money, he told me I was imagining things. Eventually, everyone else started believing that too. I swallowed hard, so I stopped arguing. Instead, I started documenting. She explained how she had spent years collecting records, printing statements, and comparing transfers. Whenever she noticed something missing, she saved the proof and stored it safely in the unit. I knew one day someone would have to see it. At the bottom of the letter, she mentioned the flash drive. Everything important is on there: recordings, copies of emails, and financial summaries. I spoke with 2 attorneys who confirmed the evidence was strong. I never pursued a lawsuit because I knew your father would drag it out and try to destroy my reputation further. Then came the final line: the truth is the only revenge I need. I sat there in the quiet storage unit, staring at the words. For 25 years, my mother had been called crazy. She had been mocked, ignored, and dismissed. But she had never been wrong. 2 months later, my father hosted a dinner at the house. A few of his colleagues and longtime friends came over, filling the dining room with polite conversation. At one point, someone mentioned my mother. Dad sighed and shook his head. Claire struggled with reality. He said softly, "She believed a lot of things that simply weren't true." Something inside me snapped. I stood up slowly. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "she was telling the truth." The room went silent. I placed a thick folder on the table in front of him. Bank records, investigator reports, transfer logs. Right on top was the final summary page with the total highlighted in bright yellow. $2,847,000. My father's face turned pale. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the flash drive into my laptop and pressed play. His own voice filled the room from one of the recordings, laughing. "Claire will never prove anything." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. For the first time in 25 years, everyone finally believed my mother,